He's a teacher, which he shouldn't be.
And yet at times we feel that God is near. Though we are overwhelmed with awe as we behold the signs of God's presence, still we feel within us a kinship with the divine. And so we turn to you, O God, looking at the world about us and inward to the world within us, there to find you and from your presence gain life and strength. Just want to take this thing off. For those of you who can, please rise for the Baruch Hu. Baruch Hu et Adonai HaMevorach. Baruch Adonai HaMevorach Leolam Eved. Praise Adonai, to my praise is due. Praise Adonai, to my praise is due, now and forever. Baruch Ata Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher bivaro ma'ariv aravim, b'chochma poteach she'arim, ובתבונה משנה עתים, ומחליף את הזמנים, ומסדר את הכוכבים במשמרותיהם ברקיע כרצונו, בורא יום ולילה גולל אור מפני חושך, וחושך מפני אור. ומעביר יום ומביא לילה, ומבדיל בין יום ובין לילה, אדוני צבאות שמו. אל חי וקיים תמיד ימלוך עלינו לעולם ועד, ברוך אתה אדוני, המעריב ערבים. Unending is your love for your people, the house of Israel. Torah and mitzvot, laws and precepts have you taught us. Therefore, Adonai our God, when we lie down and when we rise up, we will meditate on your laws and rejoice in your Torah and mitzvot forever. Day and night we will reflect on them, for they are our life and the length of our days. Then your love shall never depart from our hearts. Blessed is Adonai, who loves your people Israel. Together with the Shema Yisrael. Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad, Baruch Shem Kevod Malchuto, Leolam Eved. Hear, O Israel, Adonai is our God, Adonai is one. Blessed is God's glorious majesty forever and ever. You may be seated. ואהבת את אדוני אלוהיך בכל לבבך ובכל נפשך ובכל מאודיך. והיו הדברים האלה אשר אנוכי מצווך היום על לבביך, ושיננתם לבניך ודיברת בם, בשבתך בביתך ובלכתך בדרך ובשוכבך ובקומך, וקשרתם לאות על ידיך, והיו לטוטפות בין עיניך, וכתבתם על מזוזות ביתך ובישעריך, למען תזכרו ועשיתם את כל מצוותיי, הייתם קדושים לאלוהיכם, אשר הוצאתי אתכם מארץ מצרים, להיות לכם לאלוהים. אני Adonai Elohechem. You shall love Adonai your God with all your mind, with all your strength, with all your being. Set these words which I command you this day upon your heart. Teach them faithfully to your children. Speak of them in your home and on your way, when you lie down and when you rise up. Bind them as a sign upon your hand. Let them be a symbol before your eyes. Inscribe them on the doorposts of your house and on your gates. Be mindful of all my mitzvot and do them. So shall you consecrate yourselves to your God. I am Adonai your God, who led you out of Egypt to be your God. I am Adonai your God. We continue with Mi Chamocha. מי כמוך באלים אדוני, מי כמוך נדר בקודש, נורא תהילות אוסף אלה. מלכותך ראו בניך, בוקי הים לפני משה, זה אלינו ואמרו, אדוני ימלוך לעולם ועד. ונאמר כי יפת אדוני את יעקב, וגאולו מיד חזק ממנו. ברוך אתה אדוני, גאל ישראל. אדוני שפתי תפתח ופי יגיד תהילתך. Eternal God, open my lips, that my mouth may declare your glory. Please rise. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu ve'Elohei avotenu v'imotenu, Elohei Avraham, Elohei Yitzchak, ve'Elohei Yaakov, Elohei Sarah, Elohei Rivka, Elohei Rachel ve'Leah, Ha'el Hagadol Hagibor v'Norah, El Elyon, Gomel Chasadim Tovim, V'Konei Hakol, וזוכר חסדי אבות ואימהות, ומביא גאולה לבני בניהם, למען שמו ואהבה. מלך עוזר ומושיע ומגן, ברוך אתה אדוני, מגן אברהם ועזרת שרה. אתה גיבור לעולם אדוני, מחיי הכל אתה רב להושיע. מכלכל חיים בחסד, מחיי הכל ברחמים רבים. סומך נופלים ורופא חולים, ומתיר אסורים, ומקיים אמונתו לשני עפר. מי כמוך בעל גבורות, ומי דומה לך, מלך ממית ומחיה, ומצמיח ישועה, ונאמן אתה לחיות הכל. ברוך אתה אדוני, מחיי הכל. You are holy, your name is holy, and your holy ones declare your glory day by day. Blessed is Adonai, the holy God. A prayer for peace. O God, our Redeemer and Helper, let all who live affirm you and praise your name in truth. Adonai, whose nature is goodness, we give you thanks and praise. Shalom Rav. Shalom Rav al Yisrael Amcha, Tasim Leolam. Shalom Rav al Yisrael Amcha, Tasim Leolam. Ki ata melech Adon, lechol hashalom. Ki ata melech Adon, lechol hashalom. Shalom Rav al Yisrael Amcha, Tasim Leolam. Shalom Rav al Yisrael Amcha, tasim leolam, v'tov be'einecha levarech et amecha Yisrael, v'chol eit u'v'chol sha'a b'shlomecha. Shalom Rav al Yisrael Amcha, tasim leolam. Shalom Rav al Yisrael Amcha, tasim leolam. Tasim leolam. Tasim leolam. We pause for a few moments of silent prayer. Ose shalom bimromav, hu yaseh shalom aleinu, ve'ale kol Yisrael ve'imeru. Amen. We are assembled with our friends in the shadow that has fallen on their home. We raise our voices together in prayer to the source of life, asking for comfort and strength. We need light when gloom darkens our home. To whom shall we look but to the Creator of light? We need fortitude and courage when pain and loss assail us. Where shall we find them, if not in the thought of the one who preserves all that is good from destruction? I lift up my eyes to the mountains. What is the source of my help? My help comes from Adonai, the maker of heaven and earth. God will not allow your foot to slip. Your guardian will not slumber. Behold, the guardian of Israel neither slumbers nor sleeps. The Eternal One is your keeper. Adonai is your shade at your right hand. The sun will not harm you by day, nor the moon by night. Adonai will guard you from all evil. God will protect your being. Adonai will guard you coming and going from this time forth and forever. Adonai, God of the spirits of all flesh, you are close to the hearts of the sorrowing, to strengthen and console them with the warmth of your love, and with the assurance that the human spirit is enduring and indestructible. Even as we pray for perfect peace for those whose lives have ended, so do we ask you to give comfort and courage to the living. May the knowledge of your nearness be our strength, O God, for you are with us at all times, in joy and sorrow, in light and darkness, in life and in death. The 23rd Psalm. Adonai is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pasture. You lead me beside still waters. You restore my soul. You lead me in the path of righteousness for the sake of your name. Even when I walk in the valley of the shadow of death, I shall fear no evil, for you are with me. With rod and staff you comfort me. You have set the table before me in the presence of my enemies. You have anointed my head with oil. My cup overflows. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of Adonai forever. Please rise for the El Malei Rachamim. El Malei Rachamim, Shochein b'maromim, Hametzei menucha nechona, Tachat kanafei hashchina, V'ma'alot kedoshim u'taharim, כי זוהר הרקיע מזהירים את נשמת ישראל שמואל בן אברהם ותמר שלח על עולמו. אנא ברחמים יסתירהו בסתר כנפיך לעולמים, ויצרור בצרור החיים את נשמתו, אדוני הוא נחלתו, וינוח בשלום על משכבו, ונאמר Amen. O God, full of compassion, you who dwell on high, grant perfect rest under your wings of your presence, of the presence of under your wings in the company of the holy and pure ones, to our loved one, Rabbi Israel Dresner, who has now entered eternity. Merciful one, let him find refuge forever in the shadow of your wings, and let his soul be bound up in the bond of eternal life. The eternal God is his inheritance. May he rest in peace. Let us all say, Amen. Before we do Kaddish, I'd like to read a special reading. The light of life is a finite flame. Like the Shabbat candles, life is kindled. It burns, it glows. It is radiant with warmth and beauty. But soon it fades. Its substance is consumed, and it is no more. In light we see, in light we are seen. The flames dance and our lives are full. But as night follows day, the candle of our life burns down and gutters. There is an end to the flames. We see no more and are no more seen. Yet we do not despair, for we are more than a memory slowly fading into the darkness. With our lives, we give life. Something of us can never die. We move in the eternal cycle of darkness and death, of light and life. Although all the mourners and anyone else who would like to recite Kaddish, please rise and read with me. Yitkadal v'yitkadash shemei Rabbah, v'alma divrach yirutei v'yamlich malchutei, b'chayechon uvyomechon u'b'chayei dechol Beit Yisrael, ba'agala v'zman kariv v'imru, Amen. Yehei shmei Rabbah mevarach le'olam olmei olmaya, yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitromam v'yitnaseh, v'yitadar v'yitaleh v'yitalal shemei d'kudesha b'richu. Le'elah min kol birchata v'shirata, tush b'chata v'nechemata, ta'amiran be'alma v'imru, Amen. Yehei shlom rabba min shemaya, v'chayim aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru, Amen. Oseh shalom mimromav, hu ya'aseh shalom, aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru, Amen. Oseh shalom mimromav, hu ya'aseh shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael ve'imru, Amen. Thank you, everyone. I now turn this over to Avi.
Thank you, Cantor Amalis, for that. Welcome, everybody. Glad to see so many familiar faces tonight. I can't see everybody on my single screen, so you'll forgive me if I don't note everyone by name. But I just want to say a few words about how all of this is going to work, and then I'll turn to this evening. Each night we'll be doing this at 7 p.m. for the full Shiva, the full 7 days. So every night except for Friday, we'll be here. And all of the information is on the Temple Beth Tikva, Wayne, New Jersey website. It will have a list of everyone who will be leading the services moving forward. Rabbi similarly led us off last night, Cantor Amalis today, and there will be a different rabbi leading each of the next 5 nights of Shiva. So we will also have different speakers each night. And tonight, it's my privilege to have our first speaker, Rabbi David Saperstein, kick things off, fittingly enough, on Martin Luther King Day, which is not lost on anyone here, I'm sure. And there's a million things that I could say about David. Professionally, let me just say he's the Director Emeritus of the Religious Action Center of Reform Judaism. I'll let him explain what that is, but I think most of the people here know very well about the RAC and its work. And let me also say that among his many illustrious accomplishments, Rabbi Saperstein was named by President Obama as ambassador at large for international religious freedom. I hope I got that title right, David. You'll tell me if I screwed it up. Those of you who have seen the photo of my dad and me with the Obamas at the White House in 2013 for the 50th anniversary of the March on Washington, see the people in the photo, but you do not see the person who made that photo happen, which is Rabbi Saperstein. He's the one that put my dad's name forward to be there that night. And so that would not have happened without him. The other thing I want to say about that photo and about that experience is that it also would not have happened without my sister Tamar, because Dad asked her first if she wanted to go to the White House. And Tamar said, you know, it'll mean more to Avi than it will to me, so I think you should ask him. So I want to give Tamar her credit here as well. And I think without further ado, David, you can take it off. And then when David's done, I'll introduce our second speaker. Thank you.
Oh, it is an honor and a pleasure for me to be with you and your wonderful family there. It is, you know, what an important part of my life your father played a role in, and I'm really honored to do this. So I'm here today, not only because of my deep and long friendship with Cy Dresner, but in my long service running the social justice public policy arm of the Reform Jewish movement, that is the Religious Action Center of Reform Judaism. His role in Reform Jewish life was such an iconic role. He served at the highest levels of the social justice arms of the Reform Jewish movement for decades, did so with distinction, with his powerful voice, with his intellectual panache, and his relentless passion of social justice that marked his entire rabbinate and indeed his entire life. To spend time with Cy in the trenches, either protest trenches or policy trenches or public mobilization trenches, was to feel the living spirit of the biblical prophets, an impact he shared with Dr. Martin Luther King, with whom he was so close. And in that spirit, I think Cy would heartily approve if I tried to convey Cy's impact more deeply with words not written about Cy, but considering about whom they were said, who said them, where they were uttered, what this day is. Well, we celebrate that these words could describe Cy equally well. They were the words of the only rabbi closer to Dr. King than Cy was, the legendary Rabbi Jacob Rothschild of the Temple in Atlanta, Georgia, uttered about Dr. King in introducing him to speak at the 1963 National Biennial Convention in the Union of American Hebrew Congregations, now the Union for Reform Judaism, just months after the March in Washington. These are just a slight paraphrase of his words. It is difficult to remember a time that when we have needed Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. more than today, a moral vacuum seems to plague our nation. At such a time, our hope derives from Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., this giant of goodness and decency. We gather here not to celebrate his life, but to draw strength from it, to be embraced and nourished and sweetened by it. Referring to the March on Washington, Rothschild continued, here was our spokesman who, like a prophet of ancient Israel, had fearlessly confronted the society of his day with its failures, who sought to rouse people to a vision of their own nobility. He had become at once the still small voice within, the not to be stilled, impassioned voice crying aloud for the freedom and dignity of every man and woman. The thunder of sound assured him of his place in their hearts and in the ears of great numbers of Americans, whatever hue their skin might be, but not in all. This man had not always been and everywhere so enthusiastically received. Just as in Isaiah's day, there have been those in our own who say to the seers, see nothing, and to the prophets, never tell us what is right. Speak to us pleasant words. Get out of our way. Let us hear no more of the Holy One of Israel. Words to remember this Martin Luther King Day, but words that capture so much of Rabbi Cy Dresner's career, experiences, and legacy. His prophetic witness was remarkable and inspiring, his booming voice eloquent, challenging, and persuasive. But his message, too, was often controversial. Whether we were talking about Soviet Jewry, Palestinian rights, US immigration policy, apartheid, the Vietnam War, Israel's occupation and settlement policies, Cy Dresner never backed down. He was early to challenge immoral policies, often before such opposition became popular. He never tempered his voice. He never backed down. He pushed us in areas that you might not be so aware of. When I wanted to break new policy that I suspected might be controversial, I would line Cy up in advance to be supportive, often finding he was already working on that issue, sometimes ahead of where I was. We were the only major national organization to challenge President Reagan's policies in El Salvador and Nicaragua. We were the first to call for economic sanctions against South Africa. We were the only Jewish group to support the proposed SALT II treaty, and we led the successful efforts to mobilize wall-to-wall in the Jewish community support for the nuclear freeze campaign. On every one of these issues, Cy was a lead voice in shaping these policies. Cy Dresner was above all a true Ohev Israel, a true lover of Israel, infused with Zionist ideals. And he was a lover of the people of Israel and of the Hebrew language. He raised Tamar and Avi to speak Hebrew, and in our own conversations with just the two of us when he was at the Relgious Action Center for Commission on Social Action meetings, the meetings of the National Policy Group of the Reformed Jewish Movement, he would often flip back and forth seamlessly between English and Hebrew, most usually when we were talking about Israel. He was indeed a key supporter and leader in so many progressive Jewish organizations nationally, particularly those on behalf of an Israel that would make a fair and just peace with the Palestinians. Now, as you've heard in earlier tributes and eulogies, Cy was not a joke teller, but he could floor me with a clever quip once in a while. My favorite being that when there was a news report in the 1980s of Israeli soldiers who had sneaked into Lebanon, taking action against the PLO terrorists in that country, then stole rented cars and drove those cars across the border to Israel. When we heard that news, he didn't miss a beat in saying, the living embodiment of Leon Pinsker's dream. Pinsker's classic Zionist work of the 1880s was called, drumbeat here, auto-emancipation. Here, who would come up with a quip like that but Cy Dresner? As to his encyclopedic mind, so many of you have heard stories about. Jossie Wurzburg, also a longtime veteran of the commission and a formidable civil rights advocate in Tennessee, who Avi and Cy visited in Memphis on their visit, journey revisiting the sites of Cy's activism and imprisonments in the South, tells the story of one of our commission meetings that we held at Kutz Camp. After dinner and evening program, a bunch of members were sitting around in a room on the bookshelf. Someone picked out a book and said, "Cy, weren't you reading this book this afternoon?" So I said, "Yeah, I was." It's a book about Israel, pre-statehood, from the late 1930s to the early 1940s. As a joke, the member flipped it open arbitrarily, stopped on a page and looked at it, said, "Cy, what was the gross national product of Israel in 1939? "Oh, don't do this to me," Cy said, waving an offhand thing, thinking he had actually caught Cy in an answer he couldn't come up with. He said, "Come on, Cy, you got to tell us." He looked perplexed for a minute, and the guy said, "I think I got you." Cy said, "No, I was just doing the calculations. Do you want the answer in pounds, dollars, or shekels?" Here, you have to picture Cy's role in the civil rights work of the Commission on Social Action. First, our meetings mostly took place in the Religious Action Center of Reform Judaism's historic conference room in Washington, where, because we have provided space for 30 years to the Umbrella Leadership Conference on Civil Rights, the civil rights community's contributions to the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965 were drafted in that room. Cy loved being in that room. And he was one of a small clique of some of the greats of the civil rights movements who were leaders of our movement of the Commission on Social Action. And Cy was one of the very few, along with this group I'm mentioning, ever to be granted honorary life membership on the commission, which he served on for 44 years. There was Kivi Kaplan, the president of the NAACP in the late 60s and 70s. The legendary Al Vorspan, who was arrested with Cy in St. Augustine, responding to Dr. King's appeal for Jewish support. Rabbis Roland Gittleson and Arthur Lelyveld, and the remarkable Joe Rao, one of America's greatest civil rights lawyers, all serving in our leadership at that period of time. And right amongst this civil rights elite, national elite, was Rabbi Cy Dresner. Now picture him among that group for a minute. I'll tell you what made him different. When we were sitting in our commission meetings, they all spoke sitting down. Cy would stand up at his full 6'2" height. And truly, if you would ask me before you said it last night, here, I didn't know that he was only 6'2". Here, he seemed so much bigger than that when he really got going and when he felt strongly on some issue. Since they were amongst friends, the others would be calm and pithy. Cy would be always comprehensive and excitable. An encyclopedic mind impressed even that heady group. He'd stand, touch the hinge of the right eye on his glasses, remember that? Come up with some esoteric insight into the issue at hand that no one else knew, or quote from memory some speech or article directly on point, and then really pick up speed and get into it, talking faster and louder, occasionally saliva on his lips, gesturing intensely, and ending with a peroration that more often than any of these famous eloquent orators could do would evince applause. He told great stories. Here we heard about his kids, about his family, about his extraordinary adventures. Jossie reminded me of one I had also heard. You'll have to correct me, Avi. I don't know if it's about his father or grandfather getting sworn in as a U.S. citizen. He stood before a judge who was asking him qualifying questions, but after giving an answer to each of them, he would glance at his watch. And finally, the judge remarked, "Mr. Dresner, are you sure you have time to become a citizen today?" "Oh, sorry, Your Honor," he responded, "but the baseball game begins in 40 minutes. We're tied for first place." And judge interrupted and said, "Go ahead, Mr. Dresner, you're a citizen." In the Jewish tradition, we refer to a handful of truly outstanding figures in our communities as Gidolei Hador, the great ones of their generation. Amongst those who labored in the proud social justice tradition of the Jewish people, and most particularly in the hallmark Tikkun Olam efforts of Reform Judaism, Rabbi Cy Dresner was truly one of the Gidolei Ador for so many decades of blessing to our work as Rodfei Shalom and Rodfei Tzedek, pursuers of justice and peace. And now we ensure that his legacy will live on only as we take up his work and fulfill his dreams of justice and peace for us, for America, for Israel, for the world. Zeker Tzadik Livracha. May the memory of the righteous be for a blessing.
David, thank you so much for that. I just want to take issue with one thing that you said, which is that occasionally Cy Dresner did not have saliva on his lips.
We tend to try not to, when he got going, be sitting right in front of him at the time, but it was part of who he was.
I'm going to contradict something that I did earlier. I said I wasn't going to call anybody out personally and welcome them and highlight them, but when I quickly glanced through the screen, I do want to highlight one person before I introduce the next speaker. My dad prided himself, the most arrested rabbi in America was only true for a little while. So then our fallback position was the most arrested and jailed rabbi during the civil rights movement, which was unimpeachable. Nobody, can dispute that. And I was speaking with someone who was on this screen last week, last week. Maybe it was via email, actually. And Rabbi Alan Setcher is here with us from Whitefish, Montana. Rabbi Setcher is now officially the most arrested and jailed rabbi during the civil rights movement, having been arrested and jailed twice with my father in Albany, Georgia, and in St. Augustine, Florida. And this is not how he would have wanted to get the title, I'm sure, but nevertheless, it is his. It is well deserved. And so just a little kvod harav calling out Rabbi Setcher for that. And before I introduce the next speaker, let me say that after our next speaker and every night after our featured speakers, we will have an open mic night, as it were, which will be an opportunity for everyone here to weigh in. If you do not want to speak publicly and would rather send something, you can send an email to avidresner7@gmail.com. And I'll be happy to read whatever you send and to respond to it, as will my sister Tamar and my aunts Eileen and Phyllis, who are here. If you would like to speak, please go into the chat and you will find where it says Temple Beth Tikva. That will take you to Dawn Tausis, who is hosting each one of these evenings, and she is keeping a list of all the people who would like to speak. So if you just send a quick chat to Dawn and say, hey, I'd like to speak, she will put you on the list. We're trying to stick to a 90-minute time limit each night so as not to make this like one of my dad's services. So 8:30 is the cutoff. We have plenty of time. But if for some reason you do not get to speak tonight, fear not, Dawn is keeping the list and she will put you right at the top of the list for the next evening. And so it will go. And again, I want you to go to the Temple Beth Tikva website to see who is leading services and who is speaking each night. I will highlight one particular evening, Thursday evening, will be led by Rabbi Ari Lorge from Central Synagogue, who I also saw here earlier. And our featured speaker that night is going to be none other than Ambassador Andrew Young. And he will be preceded by Rabbi Everett Gendler, who is a legend and a year older than my dad was. Unfortunately, Everett is in rehab now. We had asked him to lead the minyan that night. He's not up for leading it, but is going to do a reading for us. And Everett was, if you can believe it, ahead of my dad on most of the issues of the day, including Vietnam, including the occupied territories. And Everett was the polar opposite of my dad. My dad was big and bombastic. Everett, was always and is always very quiet and unassuming. And I'm sure I will say this about him again on Thursday. Nevertheless, I wanted to give you a preview of that. And also for the Chatham Synagogue folks out there, Rabbi Or Rose of Hebrew College is going to be leading the minyan on Motzei Shabbat. And on Sunday, our last night of Shiva, it will be led by none other than Rabbi Angela Buchdahl of Central Synagogue, who just played an incredible role, as you probably read about, in the release of the hostages from the shul in Texas. So as befits my father, we've got an all-star lineup, and that helps deal with some of the grief that my family and I are experiencing. So
Avi, before you go on,
Yeah.
indulge me just a minute here. I was really glad you called out Alan Setcher, who played such an important role in that era, along with your dad. And I just want to also acknowledge that Rabbi Dan Freelander is such an important leader of the reform movement, is with us also here. And considering Dr. King's message and what's happening right now in Congress, here in the voting rights, I'm really glad you have Ari Large on, and I really would recommend to people that go to the Central Synagogue website and pull up his sermon a week ago on voting rights. It was really fantastic, and here, and nothing's more important than succeeding in our efforts to get the voting rights renewal passed. So, thank you.
amen. Thank you for that, David. Okay, so our next speaker is a former congregant of dads from Sharei Shalom. You would be hard pressed to find an American more involved in the Soviet Jewry issue than Larry Lerner. Jews do not have patron saints. Nevertheless, if Jewish communities around the world had a patron saint, the Jews of Estonia would consider Larry Lerner their patron saint. And so there are many other things I could say about Larry, but I'm sure he's going to say them. So without further ado, Larry, take it away.
Hi, it's very difficult to follow Rabbi Saperstein, but I'm going to try to talk more about Sy and his involvement in Soviet Jewry, because that's where I had a major role. First of all, just like to tell you how I sort of came into Sy Dresner's aura. I was coming home in 1966 from a client meeting, and I stopped off at the Lido Diner in Springfield, and saw Sy, whom I had known peripherally, and he came over to sit down with me. It was about 10:30 in the evening, and we finished talking at 3 a.m. And at 3 a.m. I came to my house and tried to explain to my wife that I had been talking to a rabbi through 3 o'clock in the morning, and she understood, actually, knowing me and later on knowing Sy. And I told everybody that we had to join Sharei Shalom after my talk with Sy. But a few years later, in 1988, our family had a house up in Hemlock Farms in the Poconos, and Sy also had a house there. And I suggested to Sy that he had never been to Russia or the Soviet Union, and I thought we ought to go. We tried to convince another rabbi to join us. He wouldn't, but that didn't stop us. And on January 31st, 1988, we left for a 12-day trip to the Soviet Union with the help of the Union of Councils for Soviet Jews, which I was a member of the board at the time. We arrived in Moscow and set immediately to work. One of the things you brought at that time was a roll of Franklin D. Roosevelt dimes. You didn't realize how powerful they were in Russia, but that's the only way you could make phone calls from coin-operated phones and not have to worry about the KGB listening in. And so we started out calling people and ended up with meeting at the home of Vlad Kizlek and other refuseniks at the time. Among the people we met there, I'm not going to tell you all the people we met, but one of the people we met was interesting, was Luba and Alexei Mushenko, who are non-Jewish Ukrainian heroes. Alexei may be a gypsy, but when he was in jail, he met Kuznetsov, who was one of the Leningrad hijacking crew who had gotten a long sentence in jail. Actually, they were supposed to be executed, but they were given a long sentence. And while Alexei was in jail, his wife, Luba, was adopted by the Kiev Jewish community to keep his family alive because they couldn't get work. And it was a sign of the interrelationship between those Jews and non-Jews. That someone like Luba was supported by the Jewish community. While we were there, we visited literally 50 different refuseniks and poor relative families and brought their stories back to the US for help. Just for people who don't even know what, you may know what refuseniks are, but poor relatives are another attempt by the Soviet Union to prevent people from emigrating. There were people whom a family member objected to a member of their family going off to Israel, and therefore they could not leave. And there were a significant number of those people. And if you want to learn a little bit more, I could send you the story of our visit to Psy by email if you give me your email address, and write to me at lilearner3215@gmail.com, and I'll be happy to, or if you can't remember that, ask Avi, he's got the email address. Psy taught Hebrew classes while we were there to young Russians and practiced their Torah study with him. And they were along the way of finding out what their stories were. One of the more interesting stories, so to speak, when you understand that, understanding Psy very well. One night we went out to two different ways, to two different families, and I got to the Uspenskis, and Psy went to a different family than I did, and I got there a little bit early. And when Psy got there, it was a balagan because it was a snowy night, and he had gotten off at the wrong subway and slipped, and his glasses had fallen in the snow, and someone might have stepped in it. Anyway, he came there shaking with snow and looking at me and saying, how could you, give me the wrong directions, which wasn't actually the case. And then one of the Uspensky women came over with a bowl of kasha and fed him the kasha. And they kept him quiet for the moment. And kasha soothes the magic, the beast in any man. Anyway, he calmed down, and we otherwise had a good time. In Leningrad, we continued our work visiting with another 20 to 40 refusenik and poor relative families. And then we were going on to Chernivtsi because Chernivtsi was the birthplace of his father, who had come over in 1920s. So in the Leningrad airport, we met with several students of Lumumba University with their professor of Marxist philosophy and scientific socialism. And Psy, in the airport, started to debate with the professor about Marxist history and about the alleged theories of Russian involvement in World War II. And you must understand, with Psy's knowledge of history. He won hands down while all the students were laughing at the professor as he was being manhandled by Cy. Cy won because of as being a history maven. I must understand that I was with him for 12 days and I got Soviet history drummed into my head every night before bed, after bed, every meal. I learned more about the Austro-Hungarian Empire and the relationship between the Romanian and the Ukrainians and the different names that were given to places. Chernovtsi was Chernovitz. Of course, I also created a problem for me in Chernovitz. One morning, Cy went up to bed a little bit early in the morning. We were really working very hard, and I got called in by the KGB to ask what I was doing in Chernovitz, and I explained to them we were looking for Cy's family graves. I had to explain to him why we were there, why we weren't visiting the sites of the area. I told him that we were not visiting Ochatsniks, Ochatsniks are the Russian equivalent of the term refuseniks. And so that evening, we were supposed to visit with Yosef Zissels. At that time, was the most revolutionary Jewish person in Chernovtsi. He had been sent to jail for 3 years, for printing samizdat literature, and another 3 years for keeping a record of dissidents who were sent to psychiatric hospitals because they were dissidents. Anyway, we met with Joseph Zissels, and he only spoke Russian. His mother, who was with us, spoke Yiddish, and neither of them spoke English. So we had this four-way conversation where I would speak English, Cy would translate into Yiddish, his mother would translate into Ukrainian, and we went back and around. And we had a beautiful conversation. And then towards the end, we were faced with the problem. We had to get back to the Hotel Sheramosh at midnight, and Zissels got on the phone and called a cab. He said, Zissels, Zissels here, 2 for the Hotel Sheramosh. And you must have said at that point, I thought, and Cy thought, that we were going to be in trouble because I had just told the KGB that I wasn't visiting with any refuseniks, and here the most prominent refusenik in town was calling for us. Anyway, we went outside, no KGB came around. We hugged, kissed, and said goodbye. And I've seen Zissels many times over the years. He's now head of the BOD for the Ukraine. But just as Cy taught the Jews we met about the history of Jews in the USA, we learned many new facts of life in the Soviet Union from all the people we met. It was an enlightenment for both of us. Over the years, Cy and I would meet in Livingston, New Jersey, at Epicessen with Harold Braff, Sholem, for 5-hour breakfast over bagels and coffee to discuss the world's problems, baseball, Jewish life, and temples. I'm sure he is meeting with Hal and others in the world beyond to continue these discussions. I thank you for having me here today.
Thank you, Larry. Appreciate that. Dad would have appreciated it. Let me just say, since I gave other people billing for service leading and speaking, I would be remiss. I'll go through the ones I didn't mention. Tomorrow night, our service will be led by Rabbi Jody Gordon of Hevra of Southern Berkshire. And our speaker will be Leonard Grob, Vice President of Partners for Progressive Israel. Then Wednesday, we will be led by Rabbi Michael Farbman. Apropos what Larry just said, Rabbi Farbman came from Vitebsk, Ukraine, the hometown of Mark Chagall. Rabbi Farbman is a very dear family friend of Natasha and her sister Irina, who is here as well, and of mine. He and his wife Olya and their kids. The suits that my boys were in yesterday could very well have belonged to their boys at one point. We're not sure if they were those friends or our friends Christian and Levine, but it certainly belonged to one of them. And also, Rabbi Farbman co-officiated with my dad at our wedding, and for my dad to share that kavod, that honor with anyone, tells you how much Michael means to our family. And so that's going to be a real treat on Wednesday. So Michael will be leading the service then. And the speaker that night is going to be Dr. Ray Arsenault, who is the foremost historian of the Freedom Rides. He literally wrote the book Freedom Riders, on which the PBS documentary was based. He was a personal friend of my father's. They came to know each other quite well. They watched baseball games together in addition to talking civil rights history. Don't tell him, but I'm going to give Ray one of my dad's Mets caps in Yiddish. I'll tell him that on Wednesday. And then I told you everybody else, Thursday, Andy Young, and Saturday and Sunday, I think I discussed already as well, when we'll be seeing cousins of my dad speak on both days. So it's 7:57. If you have made yourself known to Dawn at the Temple Beth Tikva in the chat, she knows who to call on next. If you have not made yourself known, then please make yourself known to her if you would like to speak. Otherwise, like I said, avidresner7@gmail.com if you just would rather send something to me but not speak publicly. So Dawn, who we got next?
Up next is Harvey Hendler, and then it'll be Alice Osier, and we have a few more after that.
Thank you, Avi, and thank you, Tamar, for this opportunity. As a member of Temple Beth Tikva for 44 years, I'd like to share a small slice of my interactions with Rabbi Dresner, especially during his later years. I have three little gems that probably most of you listening don't know about our beloved rabbi. As many of you know, for over 50 years, we had a morning minyan, which was in existence when I came to Temple Beth Tikva back in 1978. My father, Barney, of blessed memory, was a millionaire until he passed away in 1995, when I decided to continue in his stead. So for more than 20 years, I would come regularly, at least twice a week. When I became the Gabbai, the Torah reader, as Bill Rothenberg, Bill, I hope you're listening, as Bill Rothenberg's assistant. Bill was in charge, and I was there to lend a hand. It was not until Rabbi Dresner turned 85. I'm not exactly sure whether it was 85, 86, but it was late 80s, did he decide to return to Beth Tikva and to join us every Thursday at Morning Minyan. Because, you know, we take out the Torah every Monday and Thursday, and we read 3 verses for the upcoming Shabbat. So here is gem number 1. You are all probably under the impression that Rabbi Dresner is a Reform rabbi. After all, Temple Beth Tikva is a Reform synagogue. He graduated from the Hebrew Union College, Jewish Institute of Religion. But deep down inside, he was, in many ways, quite the Orthodox rabbi. Never forgetting his upbringing in an Orthodox yeshiva in Brooklyn. Why do I say that? When I would come prepared to chant Torah twice a week, I would look at the Jewish calendar and the Reform Movement website to confirm the correct Parsha. And now that Rabbi Dresner decided to join us at Minyan, he only wanted to read Torah every Thursday morning. So Bill would call him up by his Hebrew name, Ya'amod Israel ben Avraham v'tamad harav rishon. And he would bolt up and immediately look at the scroll and take his two hands and begin to re-roll the scroll to a different place. Rabbi, what are you doing? This is the correct Parsha for the week, I asserted. Well, as you all know by now, you don't ever challenge this rabbi on matters of facts and especially halakha. He would stop, he would put his hand in his pocket and whip out his tiny blue bichel, in Yiddish, a book. And this book was his luach, his calendar, from which he carried everywhere he went. Forget iPhones, forget tablets, or the use of technology. This luach to Rabbi Dresner was the emes, the truth, because it contained all of the Torah readings published by Jay Levine in New York City. By the way, Jay Levine, unfortunately, is no longer in business. And of course, this luach was an Orthodox calendar, not a Reform calendar. But who was I to argue with the rabbi, since he always prepared his Torah readings in advance, and he was not about to change. Hence, my suspicion that Rabbi Dresner, deep down inside, loved to practice many of the Orthodox traditions. I can cite many other examples of his orthodoxy, but I promised Avi I would keep it short. Gem number 2. Did you know that Rabbi Dresner set the standard for group assembly protection from COVID ahead of the CDC guidelines? You're probably saying to yourself, really? Let me explain. I'm going to try to say this as diplomatically as I can, but as many of you know, when the rabbi would speak, he would often eject saliva from his mouth, especially when he spoke with his loud voice and when he was excited. It was an inadvertent and involuntary gesture. But when he came to read from the Torah on Thursday, I suddenly realized they had to do something to prevent possible damage to our scrolls. So I came up with a fix. And here is the conversation I had with the rabbi. Rabbi, this is a difficult conversation to have with you, but I hope you will agree this is necessary. As you know, you often eject saliva when you speak. And in order to protect our Sifrei Torahs from damage, I must request that you wear a mask. Who knew that we were ahead of our time with COVID? In addition, I will be covering the scroll with clear diamond acetate sheets. Is this agreeable with you, Rabbi? And without hesitation, he knew exactly what I was talking about and agreed wholeheartedly to comply. For the last thing he wanted to do was damage our holy scrolls. Do no harm was his belief. It was a bit awkward at first, but after a while, it became a normal and customary practice, just the way we do it today. We don't walk into the sanctuary or go to the bima without a mask on. A man ahead of his time. And finally, gem number 3. I'm sure every member listening will recall exactly how Rabbi Dresner did the honor of Hagba. It was a unique style that I have never seen practiced by another rabbi. Normally, when we raise the Torah to dress it, we stand directly in front of the scroll we grab the two Eitz Chaim, flex our wrists, lift the scroll, and turn our back to the congregation with arms outspread. Not to Rabbi David. As you know, he would cross his hands, flip the scroll, and raise it in one sweeping motion, exposing the minimum of 3 columns of Torah, with his arms outstretched, facing the congregation, not having his back to the congregation. Pure chutzpah, pure strength. And he would recite from memory, V'zot habracha, asher shel Moshe lifnei bnei Yisrael. Al pi Adonai. Biyad Moshe, this is the Torah, which God commanded Moses to hand down to the people of Israel. By the way, this is another example of an orthodox belief, not practiced, by the way, by many Reformed congregations. Okay, you got the picture? You got this picture in your head now of him lifting. Now, the rabbi, as he approached every one of his birthdays, especially in his late 80s, decided that he must do Hagbah, do a crossover lift above his head to demonstrate his thanks to God for his continued life and strength. So I am up there now on the bima with Bill Rothenberg, and we both look at each other and say, if he drops it, we have to fast for 40 days. But you guessed it, he was determined to lift it his way. With Bill and I flanking him on either side, we helped him lift and steadied the Eitz Chaim so they would not wave in the wind to bring them safely back down to the reading table. And every year, come his birthday, I would cringe, turn grayer, and lose what little hair I have because of the high anxiety over his willfulness, but more importantly, his determination. So there you have it, 3 gems. I thank you for allowing me to share these 3 little gems about my rabbi. He was determined, he was unstoppable, he was unwavering in his belief in the Almighty. He awakened in me, and I hope many of you, what I refer to as the Pintele Yid, that little piece of Jewishness in each of us. I will miss him. May he rest in peace, knowing that he made a difference in our lives.
Harvey, thank you for that. There are three things you just made me think of. On the latter point, it never occurred to me that my dad's Hagbah may have been the reason that I got into weightlifting at such an early age, but now it makes sense to me. As for the Jay Levine thing, I think they only went out of business maybe 2.5, 3 years ago.
Right.
And that is probably, in retrospect, when my dad's cancer began. And I can't help but think that he knew that his days were numbered when Jay Levine stopped printing that luach. And then the final thing I'll say on the saliva is that when he moved to Sunrise, when Tamar and I moved him out of the house right after his 90th birthday, when he got all the health problems, when he was at Sunrise in Wayne, he got physical therapy, occupational therapy, and speech therapy. And the speech therapist was there to work with him on the saliva. And I want you to know, I hope she's not here tonight, he had the hottest speech therapist in the world. And if anyone would make you drool, it was this woman. I needed speech pathology after meeting with them. Okay, Dawn, who we got next?
Thank you.
Alice Ogier. Alice, you're muted.
All right, I'm in awe of the fact that Rabbi Dresner has continued his legacy of teaching during his Shiva period and how excited this moment must be for him to know that his wishes have come true. And Alan Setcher, who's here, he married my sister and my brother-in-law in Passaic, New Jersey, in my parents' house a gazillion years ago. And we all would discuss what a gorgeous rabbi he was with a beautiful wife. And so I'm just thrilled to be in the same presence with him again. My comments are related to Rabbi Dresner as a dad of Avi and Tamar. Years ago, when Avi and Tamar were about 13 and 14, their parents signed them up for the Temple Beth Tikva Human Sexuality class, at which time I was a volunteer teacher trained by a Gentile gentleman named Derek Calderwood, who wrote a curriculum for the liberal Unitarian Universalists. There are about 12 kids allowed in each class. I did this for 12 or 13 years. Since the material was not shying away from the facts of life and we were trained to address all questions, we were required to have a parent orientation prior to the beginning of class and get parental permission for their children to attend. Several of the parent orientation activities we would do with their children the following week. As an initial icebreaker, we had large sheets of blank paper around the floor of the Temple Youth Lounge in the basement of the temple with magic markers on each sheet and a sex ed word at the top of each sheet, like intercourse, menstruation, masturbation, etc. We asked each parent to walk around the room and list all the slang they knew for each word. There was a lot of awkwardness and giggling initially until the parents really got into it. Imagine my angst prior when I knew such people as my rabbi, my gynecologist were there expecting me to have expertise and the responsibility of leading their kids and them. After the group of parents wrote on the list and were silly and ready for more, we gave each of them a sheet from the floor and asked them to read the words out loud. Rabbi Dresner's word was intercourse. We were all hysterical when he read every slang word he knew for intercourse and told us what the most popular ones were in his neighborhood in Brooklyn. The following week, the kids came, and we did the same icebreaker with them. After they read their lists, we brought out the parents' lists. They stared in shock, recognizing their parents' handwriting, and were in disbelief that their parents knew such words and many colloquialisms from their neighborhoods of yore. Of course, Avi and Tamar, they were there separate years, and their friends were in shock that their rabbi not only participated in this exercise, but knew such words. Also, as pre and teenagers, Avi and Tamar went to a how to be a babysitter class at the Y, which was a great idea. And I believe they marketed their skills to me, and I hired them to babysit for my kids, Ari and Dara. They were remarkably serious about their babysitting and came with an agenda or lesson plan for games and knowledge of how to get the child to sleep and appropriate snacks. Our family will never forget these remarkable Dresner kids who influenced our lives in an impactful way. I often thought for a child to have a public parent such as Rabbi Dresner, who never avoided big issues, it could not have been easy. They took the best of their parents and ran with it, and have written the book on how to live with your parent until. Thank you, Avi and Tamar, for being such wonderful offspring of your parents and continuing the legacy.
Thank you, Alice.
Alice, thanks so much. That's amazing. Look, I'm gonna pull Dresner prerogative here and say that all the time that I spent talking does not count towards the time limit. I think my dad would approve of that, because I can't help but respond to all of these things. Tom, you want to tell one story and I'll tell the other, or you don't want to tell them? I'm telling it if you don't.
You can tell either story.
They're both inappropriate, so therefore I'm going to tell them. So Tamar and I were out for pizza with our mom and dad at Casa Mia on Hamburg Turnpike, right near where St. Joe's Hospital is. It has been there for decades. I don't know how this came up, but the word androgynous came up in conversation. I was probably 10, Tamar was probably 8, and my dad said, androgynous, is that the one where you take it up the ass? And we both were shocked. My dad was never appropriate. And I got that from him, as you can tell. Tamar didn't want to tell this story. The second story, we were at my Aunt Phyllis's house with her grandchildren, my cousin Robert's kids. And we talked about the word, we were talking about breast cancer, and how with breast cancer, sometimes you have a mastectomy and you have a reconstruction where you get a prosthesis. And we explained that a prosthesis was a fake breast. And later in the conversation, I believe it was Zachary at the time, said the word shit, and he must have been 9. And my dad said to him, Zachary, when I was your age, I didn't know words like that. In fact, even when I was older, you guys, looking at me and Tamar, had to teach me words that I didn't know. And so he says, you remember when you told me what a dildo was? Now there's a 6-year-old, a 9-year-old, and an 11-year-old at this table.
Going, what's a dildo?
So the 6-year-old says, what's a dildo? Total silence, complete silence. I could hear the crickets. I figure I'll jump in. I say, well, do you remember when we talked about what a prosthesis was and how we said that a prosthesis was a fake breast? Yeah. Well, a dildo is a fake penis. And he says, my cousin's kid says, you mean for like penis cancer? And I said, well, that would be one use for it. Okay, next speaker, sorry.
Okay, next is Louise Romales. Louise, I'm sorry, you're gonna have to follow that.
Oh, my God.
I'm sorry, Louise, I apologize.
This is a completely different topic. I'm going to read this. There are many special times that Charles and I have experienced with Rabbi Dresner, but I'd like to share my own. I was thinking, where do I start? Do I talk about the fact that Jenny was Rabbi's first baby naming at our temple 51 years ago? Do I tell you why I loved his sermons and never wanted them to end? Do I share the beautiful visit my grandson had with him in August, learning all about the Austrian-Hungarian Empire? Or what about the time Rabbi Dresner and my Israeli brother-in-law Micah locked horns in the lobby of the King David Hotel in Jerusalem, discussing quite heatedly and loudly the difference politically people have between the right wing and the left wing in Israel? Do I tell you how important it was for Cy Dresner to have his soup hot, very hot? Should I tell you how incredibly independent he was and his determination to put his walker in the backseat of my car without any help? Do I tell you how much I treasured the visits I had with him, which were never enough? Where do I start? What experience can I tell you about? Well, let me tell you about the Portuguese story. I've decided on none of those. About 2 years ago, we had just come home from Portugal, where we had been traveling with my sister and brother-in-law, and I wanted to know more about Portuguese jewelry. So when I went to pick him up for the Romeos, I asked him if he could just tell me a little bit about Portuguese jewelry. I knew he must know something about it. As soon as we pulled out of the driveway at sunrise, he started speaking about it and did so up until the time I dropped him off at his destination about an hour later. 3 hours later, as he got into my car, he picked up exactly where he left off. And although we were stuck in a traffic jam on the Garden State Parkway, his information continued until he got out of the car back at sunrise. I wish I could remember more than a little bit of what he told me, but I know that I want to go back to Portugal so I could experience my visit with more knowledge that's inside me. And if I do return, I will take Cy Dresner with me in my head and in my heart. I loved him and I miss him already, but I can hear his voice and see his face. Thank you for letting me share this with all of you.
Thank you for cleaning up my act, Louise. We're back on track now. So
I can go. I can meet you, but thanks.
on who's next?
Shirley, followed by Lydia. Shirley, you're muted.
All right. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. Rabbi Cy Dresner of blessed memory has left an indelible mark on my life in many and varied ways over the past 50 years. He was my rabbi, as he was for so many of you. And yes, I too was privileged to be a member of the unofficial breakfast/lunch club at the King George Diner, which never failed to last for less than 2 hours. As I listened to all the well-deserved and fitting tributes of so many, I wondered if there was something that I could say that would be slightly different from everyone else, and yet add to the measure of the man. Like so many, I was honored to count him as a personal friend. But when I became principal of the Temple Religious School, our relationship took on a whole new dimension as colleagues. Rabbi Dresner was always available to me, whether it was to consult with, to seek his opinion, or to give advice I asked for, and only when I asked for it, and to gladly come to a classroom to teach when he was invited to do so. He never interfered or questioned my judgment in school matters, and told me if I felt my decisions were the right ones, he would fully support them, and he did. His incredible wealth of knowledge and unbelievable recall were amazing, and they did not diminish even in the recent years. Even more amazing was his ability to digress from the point and the subject, and yet come back precisely to what he had been saying after the digression. There will never again be anyone like Cy Dresner. My life has been enriched by his presence in it, and I am saddened that I wasn't able to tell him that in person. But I will treasure his memory always, and all that I learned from him for over half a century for the rest of my days.
Thank you, Shirley. Dawn, who's next? Lydia? Oh, okay.
Yes. Hi. I'm Lydia Kukoff, and I am not in New Jersey. I'm in upstate New York, and I am a member of the Chatham Synagogue, where Avi and Natasha have been longtime beloved members. And I have to say that Cy, Rabbi Dresner, became sort of a member later in his life, but certainly somebody who became such an important presence among us. So we feel very blessed through Avi and Natasha that Cy Dresner, who I knew about for many, many years because I worked for many years in the Reform movement, and fate brought Avi up to us, and then Natasha, and then Lev and Sasha. But the fact is that Rabbi Dresner became one of us. He became, we don't have it by choice. We don't have a rabbi in our synagogue. We all take turns. We have a way, we lead services ourselves. We study ourselves. And we have Or Rose, who will be with you later this week as a rabbinic presence. But we want to own our Judaism. That's part of our philosophy. So, but when Rabbi Dresner came, we knew immediately that there was a giant among us, and he was. We loved him so much, and we treasured every single time he came to services. He came bringing his remarkable presence, his knowledge. In Judaism, we say that there are people among us, mainly the prophets, who brought tochacha shel ahava, that they chastise us lovingly. And Cy was the kind of person who was that kind of loving witness in the world, who reminded us to be better, what we should be doing. And his presence, his experiences enriched all of us, Jew and non-Jew alike. We all loved him so much, and we are bereft, but we feel so blessed that we had these years with him, and all of the times that he came, that he brought his charm, his Hebrew, his kidding around. He really was a presence. We're very, very fortunate that Avi and Natasha are with us, but we really want to, on behalf of all of us, say how much he meant to us, what he brought to us, what he brought to the world. Zecher Tzaddik Livracha, may this memory of this wonderful, righteous person be a blessing. He already is. Thank you, and love to Avi, Natasha, and all of you, the family.
Thank you, Lydia. I just want to say that Chatham Synagogue is a remarkable place. We discovered it, I think it's over 20 years ago now.
The phone call. Do you remember the phone call?
Yes, I do.
Erev Rosh Hashanah, I just have to say, Erev Rosh Hashanah, I get this call. I was the president at the time, and I get this call, and it's a guy named Avi Dresner, and we had there was a whole article about our area in the New York Times, and Avi said, I'm coming up, and it's Erev Rosh Hashanah, and can I come to services? And I said, sure. I said, but why is your name so familiar to me? Do I know you? No. But it turns out, of course, we are related by Cy Dresner. And Avi showed up, and he said, my wife is in Russia, but she's coming back, and can we come? And Avi, we were meeting at a church at the time, and I see this young person walk in with a challah and appeared, and there he was, and there was Natasha, and that was the beginning. And I said, come and have dinner with us. And then everybody adopted them because they were so lovely and adorable. And that was the beginning. And that was how many years ago? My God,
It's over 20 years ago. And the funny thing is that it was also, we were coming up, it was also our second or our third wedding anniversary.
Yes, I remember. And you were staying in some bed and breakfast or something in Hudson or somewhere.
Yep. And I just want to say, apropos my earlier story, that it's traditional, not for Reform Jews, but it's traditional in Orthodox Judaism. And as was noted earlier by Harvey, Dad kept a lot of Orthodox practices. We buried our older son Lev's foreskin.
That's right.
behind the Chatham Synagogue. I buried it under a sapling.
Yes.
And when I came, and it was just me and Or Rose, the rabbi who will be leading the service on Motzei Shabbat. There are no prayers. There's nothing you say. You just bury it, and that's that. And when I came back into the building, the president, well, the guy who became president later, Mitch, looks at me and he says, "Avi, what kind of tree is that?" I said, "I have no idea, but it's a peckerwood now."
Oh, oh,
Can't
Well,
help
you-
yourself.
you
You
know,
can't help yourself, can
you,
you?
you are
I
on the road
can't.
tonight, Avi. Avi,
Oh, man.
that was a bris we will
This
not.
is how I deal with life, through humor, through humor. Dad said I couldn't be too funny at my eulogy, so I'm making up for it now. All right, Dawn, rescue everyone from me. Who's next?
Actually, Avi, that's it, unless anyone else wants to speak. But I have to ask, is that a cat on Natasha's shoulder or a chinchilla?
These were the chinchillas I mentioned last night, the Jewish chinchillas, which are chinchillas. I don't know who do you have? Ruth. So this is Ruthie. Ruthie is named for Ruth Bader Ginsburg, of course. And then
Love it.
we also have Agatha, who is named for Agatha Christie and a Pokemon. Don't ask. I can get her, but
No, that's okay. Actually,
I
Steve
don't know how to use Zoom, but I
would
need-
like
my
to
name is
speak.
Barbara Aiden,
okay.
and I would
Wait.
like to tell you why I need to be part of Rabbi Dresner's funeral. My former husband met Sai working through Habanim in Canada, and they went to Israel together to work on a farm. And a few years ago at Central Synagogue, Rabbi Dresner came with another rabbi to talk about civil rights. And I called Michael up and I said to him, "Is this the same person that you never stopped talking about? You rode on the back of his motorbike?" And he said, "I had no idea that he had become a rabbi." And I just wanted to tell you that he was remarkable. Even as a young person, he had an effect on everyone he met. And I'm so glad to be with you. And I appreciate all the love that everyone wants to share about this fantastic rabbi. Thank you, and I'll be sure to be on every night, and especially when Ari talks and Angela, since I've been a member of Central for at least 35 years. But never forgot the stories about Sai.
Barbara, thank you so much for that. And that other rabbi, by the way, was Everett Gendler.
And he
the one
didn't have
who's-
much time to talk. Your father took up most of the time.
Shocking. I can't believe that. So Everett will be doing a lot more talking than my dad on Thursday. I
I'll
promise
be
you that.
listening. Thank you.
Thank you. Steve?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that my name is Steve Kupiecki. I live in Manhattan, and Avi and Tamar and myself, we shared a great grandfather. My grandmother was cousin Seymour's aunt, Bubby Fanny Dresner, and we'd be 130 if my grandmother was still alive. On behalf of the entire Fanny clan, I just wanted to say that my grandmother was a huge fan of her nephew, and I think her nephew was a huge fan of my grandmother. And I do recall many times my grandmother saying how proud she was of her nephew. And so on behalf of the Kupiecki / Dresner Kupiecki clan, I'm really glad that I've got to reconnect and with long lost cousins who I haven't really got to know very well yet, but we have lots more to learn, and I've got more pictures, and I hope that you guys do too. So I'm looking forward to reconnecting with family, and I wish you guys no more sorrow.
Thank you, Stephen. It's true. We've been trading family photos back and forth and speaking about the same great grandfather, telling the same stories. This has been a horrible time, but it's also been a blessed time because of the people who have come into my life and Tamar's life and reconnected. That's one of the positive outgrowths of this otherwise sad and difficult process. So Stephen, you're a part of that. So thank you. Anybody else? Dawn, do we have anybody else step forward? No?
I think that's it for tonight.
Well, if you subtract the 11 minutes that I spoke, I know
It's
that's
actually
a
more like
great
22.
We're under time is the point. So
Yes.
it does not count as going over. So tomorrow night, again, same bat time, same bat channel. I think actually my in-laws are also going to speak. We haven't decided if they're going to speak tomorrow night or Wednesday night. I think it will probably be tomorrow. They're going to speak in Russian, and I'm going to do my best to simultaneously translate, and Natasha will assist. So if you want to learn some Russian, tomorrow night's the night for that, in addition to all the other good stuff.
Between now and tomorrow night.
Right. Okay. So thank you, everyone. And hopefully we'll see a lot of these same faces tomorrow and some new ones as well.
Hugs. Night.
Good night.
Good night, Avi. Thanks for having us.
Barbara. I can see you. But I can't hear you. You're muted.
It was very simple and I absolutely didn't know it, but I called my technician in Vermont. You know who that is?
I do.
And he said, Ma, is the video on? I said, what? He said, on your screen, it says video. Click on it. So I did. Voila, here I am.
And there you are. There's the Shana Punham.
What can I tell you? He's only a phone call away, thank God. So that was it. And the light went on, you know, because the light wasn't on the top.
Okay.
And so my Vermont technician straightened me out.
Awesome.
Yeah.
All right. I'm having trouble leaving. Can you disconnect me?
I cannot, but I will be ending the meeting in a moment.
Yeah.
Good, wonderful.
Hello, Elaine.
Thank
How are
you.
you? Hi,
Good,
Paula.
thank you.
Paula's, everybody is still muted.
Yeah, she's. Paula,
All
those
right.
are beautiful flowers on the wall behind you.
Oh,
all right.
they're
I'm going to
magnificent.
end the meeting and we'll
Thank
see
you.
everyone tomorrow.
Yes. All right, dear. Thank you.
You're welcome. Have a good evening.
Thank you for this morning too.
Of course.